My name is Sarah Mitchell, and for the past 7 years, I've listened to my family describe me as financially incompetent while I quietly built a $180 million investment portfolio. That Saturday afternoon at my brother David's housewarming party, surrounded by granite countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, I finally let them discover exactly how illiterate I really was. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Growing up, David was the golden child. 3 years older, athletic, charismatic, and according to our parents, destined for greatness. I was the quiet one, the bookish daughter who preferred reading financial statements to socializing. At family dinners, Dad would beam at David's stories about his college entrepreneurship ventures while barely glancing up when I mentioned my economics degree. "That's nice, honey," Mom would say absently when I tried to discuss investment strategies. "But when are you going to find a real career? Something stable?" When I was 23, my maternal grandmother passed away. She'd been a silent investor in several successful ventures throughout her life, and she left me something unexpected: a trust fund worth $2.8 million. The terms were specific. I couldn't touch the principal until I was 30, but I had complete control over how it was invested. My family knew about the inheritance. They just assumed I was too financially illiterate to do anything meaningful with it. "Put it in a savings account," Dad advised at her funeral reception. "At least you can't lose it that way." David smirked. "Or give it to someone who actually knows what they're doing. I could triple that in 5 years with my real estate connections." I smiled politely and said nothing. Instead, I spent the next 7 years doing exactly what my grandmother had done. I studied. I networked quietly. I attended investment conferences where nobody knew my family. I worked with a private wealth manager who respected my analytical approach. I invested in emerging markets, renewable energy startups, and strategic real estate partnerships. I also worked a deliberately modest job as a financial analyst at a mid-sized consulting firm. It paid $73,000 annually, enough to live comfortably in a nice apartment but not enough to raise eyebrows. My family saw my lifestyle and assumed that was all I had. They never asked about my grandmother's trust. They never asked about my investments. They just assumed. By the time I turned 30, my $2.8 million had grown to $47 million. By 32, it was $89 million. At 33, through a particularly successful exit from a tech startup I'd backed early, my portfolio crossed $180 million. And nobody in my family had any idea. Meanwhile, David built his real estate empire. Mitchell Properties LC started small, flipping houses in gentrifying neighborhoods. He was good at it, I'll give him that. Charismatic enough to secure investors, strategic enough to identify emerging markets, and ruthless enough to maximize profits. He'd found success and he never let me forget it. "Sarah's still working her little analyst job," he'd announce at family gatherings. Meanwhile, I just closed on a $12 million commercial property downtown. Mom would beam. "We're so proud of you, David." Dad would nod. "That's real wealth building, son. Not just collecting a paycheck." They turned to me. "Any career developments, Sarah?" "Still analyzing market trends," I'd reply calmly. David would laugh. "Market trends? That's adorable. Real wealth is built with property, Sarah. Tangible assets. But I wouldn't expect you to understand that." What David didn't know was that 3 years earlier, when his firm was struggling to secure financing for a major expansion, an anonymous investor had provided $15.7 million in capital. The terms were favorable: 8% annual returns, silent partner status, no operational control. David's attorney had handled the paperwork. A trust entity. Completely legal, completely anonymous. David never questioned where the money came from. He was too busy celebrating his success. I'd structured it carefully with my wealth management team. "If I ever need to withdraw," I'd specified, "I want it done cleanly. No warning, fully legal, maximum impact." My trust administrator, Patricia, had raised an eyebrow. "That's your brother's company?" "It is." "And he doesn't know you're the backer?" "He doesn't." She'd smiled slightly. "Understood." For 3 years I'd watched David build his empire on my capital. He'd developed 4 luxury apartment complexes, acquired 2 commercial office buildings, and just purchased a historic downtown property for conversion into high-end condos. At every family gathering he'd lecture me about wealth building. "You're 33 years old, Sarah," he'd said at Christmas. "Still renting. Still working for someone else. When are you going to build something real?" "I'm comfortable," I'd replied. "Comfortable is just another word for complacent," Dad had added. "Your brother owns $47 million in real estate. You own what?" "A 401k. I'd smiled and changed the subject. The housewarming party was supposed to be David's crowning achievement. He'd just purchased a $3.2 million penthouse in the city's most exclusive building. Floor-to-ceiling windows, chef's kitchen, rooftop terrace with skyline views. "This is what success looks like," he'd announced to the 50 assembled guests, family, investors, business partners. "You don't get here by playing it safe. You get here by taking calculated risks, by understanding how real wealth works." He gestured to the space. "This penthouse? I bought it in cash. No mortgage. That's the difference between people who understand investment and people who just exist." His wife, Amanda, had laughed. "David worked so hard for this." Mom had actually teared up. "We're so proud. You've built something extraordinary." I'd been standing by the windows, holding a glass of champagne, observing quietly. My cousin Jennifer approached. "Must be hard," she said sympathetically. "Watching your younger brother succeed like this while you're still, While I'm still what?" I'd asked calmly. "Well, struggling isn't the right word, but, still in that starter career phase. We all develop at different speeds." I'd sipped my champagne. "I suppose we do." That's when David had called for everyone's attention. He stood in the center of his living room, Amanda beside him, our parents beaming. "I want to thank everyone for being here," he'd begun. "For believing in me, for investing in Mitchell Properties, for understanding what it takes to build real wealth." His eyes had landed on me. Some people in this room understand that. Some people get it. They see opportunity and they seize it. They don't just sit back and collect a paycheck hoping someone else will build their future for them. Several people had glanced at me. David had continued, warming to his theme. "Real estate isn't for the timid. It's not for people who are afraid to leverage, afraid to scale, afraid to think big. It's for people who understand how money actually works." He'd walked toward me, still addressing the room. "My sister Sarah, for example. Sweet girl. Works in finance, ironically. But she's what I call investment illiterate. Book smarter. But no understanding of how wealth is actually created." The room had gone quiet. I'd stood there, champagne glass in hand, face neutral. "Sarah still rents an apartment," David had announced. "Drives a 7-year-old Honda. Works her 9 to 5. And the tragic thing? She inherited almost $3 million 7 years ago. Do you know what she did with it?" He'd paused for effect. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Probably sitting in a savings account earning 1% while inflation eats it alive. That's investment illiteracy." Amanda had touched his arm. "David." But he'd been on a roll. Said, "Really? Some people are just born without that instinct. That understanding of how to make money work for you. Sarah's one of those people. Content with mediocrity, terrified of risk, totally clueless about wealth." He'd looked directly at me. "No offense, sis. But it's true. You're investment illiterate. You've had every opportunity, every advantage, and you've done nothing with it." Dad had nodded slowly. "It's a valid point. Sarah could have done so much more." Mom had looked at me with what I can only describe as pity. "Maybe it's not too late, honey. Maybe David could give you some advice." Jennifer had whispered, "This is painful to watch." The entire room, 50 people, had been staring at me. Some sympathetic, some uncomfortable, some clearly agreeing with David's assessment. I'd taken a slow sip of champagne. Let the silence stretch. Then I'd smiled. "Interesting theory." David had frowned. "Theory? Sarah, it's reality. I'm not trying to be cruel, I'm being honest. You need to hear this." I pulled out my phone. "You're absolutely right, David. I should be more strategic about my investments." "Exactly." He'd looked vindicated. Finally, some self-awareness. "Which is why," I'd continued calmly, "I'm going to make some portfolio adjustments right now." I'd opened my email app. 50 pairs of eyes watching me. Typed quickly. "Patricia. Execute withdrawal protocol for Mitchell Properties LLC. All capital, all accounts, immediate liquidation per contract terms." Said, "There," I'd said pleasantly. "Portfolio adjustment made." David had laughed. "What, did you just move your savings from one bank to another?" "That's not what I meant." His phone had started ringing. He'd glanced at it, frowned. "It's my attorney. On a Saturday." He'd looked at me, then at the phone, then back at me. "You should probably answer that," I'd suggested. He'd accepted the call, stepping toward the windows. "Greg? What's—" His face had changed. "What do you mean, withdrawal notice?" The room had gone very quiet. "That's impossible," David had said into the phone. "Our primary investor is a silent partner. The terms are locked for 5 years. He'd gone pale. 30-day exit clause? What are you? He turned to look at me. Who is the investor? What do you mean you can't tell me? I'd sipped my champagne. Greg, we have $23 million in active projects, David had said, voice rising. If that capital is withdrawn, he'd listened. Monday morning? But that's, how much? His hand had trembled. $15.7 million? That's everything. That's the entire expansion capital. Amanda had gripped his arm. David, what's happening? He'd ended the call. Stared at his phone. Looked at me. Sarah. Did you just? I'd smiled pleasantly. I told you. Portfolio adjustment. You. His voice had cracked. You're the anonymous investor? You've been, for 3 years. The room had erupted in whispers. Dad had stepped forward. Sarah, what is he talking about? I'd set down my champagne glass. David needed $15.7 million 3 years ago. His firm was over-leveraged. Banks wouldn't extend additional credit. He was about to lose a major acquisition opportunity. So I provided the capital through a trust entity. Mom's mouth had opened. You had $15.7 million? I had considerably more than that, Mom. But that's what his firm needed, so that's what I provided. 8% annual returns, fully legal, silent partnership. David had been staring at me like he'd never seen me before. You've been funding my company? For 3 years. Every expansion, every acquisition, every success you've spent 3 years lecturing me about? I'd finished. Yes. Jennifer had whispered, oh my God. But you're just an analyst, Dad had said weakly. You make $70,000 a year. How did you? Grandmother's trust, I'd explained calmly. Remember? The $2.8 million you told me to put in a savings account? I invested it instead. Quite successfully, as it turns out. How successfully? Mom had asked. I'd paused. As of this morning, my portfolio is worth $180 million. The room had gone absolutely silent. David had actually laughed, a broken sound. That's impossible. You drive a Honda. You rent a $2,400 per month apartment that I could buy this building with cash tomorrow if I wanted to, I'd said evenly. I chose to live modestly. I chose to work a regular job because I enjoy the work. I chose to invest quietly without fanfare, exactly like grandmother did. $180 million, Dad had repeated numbly. Give or take a few million depending on daily market fluctuations, I'd confirmed. The exact figure doesn't really matter, does it? Amanda had gripped David's arm. David, if she withdraws that $15.7 million. We're destroyed, he'd finished. The expansion properties, we signed contracts based on that capital availability. If it's withdrawn, we'll be in breach on 4 different projects. The penalties alone. His phone had rung again. Then Amanda's. Then 2 of his business partners across the room. I'd watched it happen in real time. The cascade of consequences. David's face had gone from pale to gray as he'd taken call after call. His development manager. His contractor. His bank. Monday morning, I'd explained to the silent room, that $15.7 million will be transferred out of Mitchell Properties accounts. The 30-day exit clause is crystal clear. I've been sending annual notices as required. You just never paid attention to who your silent partner was. You can't do this, David had said desperately. Sarah, I'm your brother. This will destroy everything I've built. Everything you built with my money while calling me investment illiterate? I'd interrupted calmly. While mocking me at every family gathering. While telling this room full of people that I'm too stupid to understand wealth. I didn't mean, You meant every word, I'd said. For 7 years, David. 7 years of condescension. 7 years of lectures. 7 years of you parading your success, my capital, while describing me as a failure. Mom had stepped forward. Sarah, honey, we didn't know. You didn't ask, I'd cut her off. Not once in 7 years did any of you ask how I was doing financially. You assumed. You saw a modest lifestyle and assumed it meant failure. You saw humility and assumed it meant incompetence. Dad had looked stricken. We're your family. And yet you celebrated publicly humiliating me, I'd finished. David didn't pull me aside for a private conversation. He announced my supposed failures to 50 people. At his housewarming party. Funded by my investment. David's phone had rung again. He'd silenced it. 3 years, I'd continued. I've collected 8% annual returns on that $15.7 million. That's $3.768 million in total returns. Fair market rate. But more than that, I've watched you build an empire and claim sole credit. I did this was actually, we did this. Except you never acknowledged the we. I'd picked up my purse. The withdrawal is legal, David. Your attorney will confirm that. The 30-day timeline starts Monday. You'll have time to secure alternate financing if you move quickly. Though with your firm's current debt-to-equity ratio, I suspect that will be challenging. Sarah, please, Amanda had said. We have employees, contractors, people depending on these projects. Then I suggest you start making phone calls, I'd replied. Because my capital is going elsewhere. There's a renewable energy startup in Portland that's quite promising. And a women-owned construction firm that's been undervalued by traditional investors. My money will do more good there. I'd walked toward the door. The crowd had parted. Jennifer had grabbed my arm. Sarah, that was necessary, I'd finished. Overdue even. Your family will never speak to you again, she'd whispered. I'd smiled. That sounds peaceful. I'd walked out of that $3.2 million penthouse, the one David had bought with returns from my investment, and taken the elevator down alone. My phone had started buzzing immediately. Text messages flooded in. Mom, Sarah, please call us. We need to talk about this. Dad, this is incredibly immature. We're family. David, you're destroying my life. I hope you're proud. I'd silenced my phone. Monday morning arrived with predictable chaos. Patricia called at 9:47 a.m. The withdrawal executed perfectly, she'd reported. Mitchell Properties LLC confirmed receipt of notice. The $15.7 million plus accrued interest is now back in your primary investment account. Any complications? Their attorney called 3 times. David Mitchell called 6 times. I referred them to the contract terms per your instructions. Everything was executed legally. Perfect. One more thing, Patricia had added. I've been doing this for 23 years. I've never seen someone structure a revenge exit quite that cleanly. I'd smiled. My grandmother taught me well. The financial consequences for Mitchell Properties were swift and devastating. By Wednesday, the news broke in the local business journal. Mitchell Properties faces liquidity crisis as major investor withdraws. The article had been clinical. David Mitchell's rapidly expanding real estate firm faces significant challenges following the withdrawal of $15.7 million in capital from an anonymous investor. The firm has active contracts on 4 major development projects, all requiring immediate capital infusion. Industry experts suggest Mitchell Properties may need to sell assets or seek emergency financing at unfavorable terms. My mother had called 17 times that week. I'd answered on the 18th. How could you do this to your brother? She demanded. I withdrew my investment, Mom. That's not doing something to him. That's managing my portfolio. You knew it would destroy his company. I knew it would create challenges, I'd corrected. Whether those challenges destroy him depends entirely on how he manages them. That's the nature of real estate investment. Risk and reward. David has lectured me about that for years. Surely he understands. We're family, Sarah. Then maybe you should have treated me like family instead of a failure. She'd hung up. Dad had tried a different approach. Email, formal, attempting authority. Sarah, your actions have serious consequences beyond just David. Your mother is distraught. Family relationships are being damaged. I'm asking you, father to daughter, to reconsider. I'd replied, Dad, I reconsidered for 7 years. Every time David mocked me, I reconsidered. Every time you agreed with him, I reconsidered. Every time Mom pitted my modest life, I reconsidered. I've done nothing but reconsider. The answer remains no. David's calls had evolved from angry to desperate to pleading. I hadn't answered any of them. 2 weeks after the housewarming party, Jennifer met me for coffee. The family is imploding, she'd reported. David's scrambling for emergency financing. Your parents aren't speaking to you. Everyone's taking sides. Which side are you on? I'd asked. She'd smiled. The side that respects someone who doesn't take shit from people who underestimate her. Good answer. For what it's worth, Jennifer had continued, I've been watching you for years. I knew you weren't struggling. The way you analyzed markets, talked about trends, you knew too much to be as clueless as they claimed. I just didn't realize how much you'd accomplished. Most people don't look past the surface, I'd said. Their loss. She'd paused. David's going to lose at least 2 of those projects. Maybe 3. His firm might survive, but it'll be smaller. Humbler. Perhaps that's not the worst outcome. Your family thinks you're a monster. I'd sipped my latte. My family spent 7 years treating me like I was incompetent. Now they've discovered I'm not, and they're angry that I'm not solving David's problems for him. That says everything about them and nothing about me. 3 weeks after the withdrawal, Patricia called with an update. Mitchell Properties has secured partial financing from a consortium of regional investors, she'd reported. Enough to complete 2 of the 4 projects. They've had to sell 1 property at a loss and put another on hold indefinitely. David's firm will survive? In a reduced capacity. His expansion plans are dead. He'll be rebuilding credibility for years. But yes, the company will survive. Good. She'd paused. You wanted him to survive? I wanted him to understand, I'd corrected. There's a difference between destruction and education. 6 months later, I attended my grandmother's birthday memorial. She would have been 92. The family gathered at the cemetery. Awkward, silent, divided. David approached me first. He looked exhausted. Older. I lost everything, he'd said quietly. The expansion. The momentum. 3 years of growth gone. You lost access to my capital, I'd corrected. That's not everything. That's just what you built with my money. I built that company. We built that company, I'd interrupted. You provided the expertise. I provided $15.7 million. Both mattered. But only one of us acknowledged that partnership. He'd been quiet for a long moment. I was awful to you. Yes. For years. Yes. I'm sorry. I'd studied him. Looked for sincerity. Found something that might have been genuine regret. Apology noted, I'd said. But forgiveness isn't automatic, David. You didn't just dismiss me once. You made it a pattern. A habit. A core part of how you defined yourself, as the successful sibling with me as the failure for contrast. I know. Do you? Because you're not apologizing for mocking me. You're apologizing because the consequences hurt you. There's a difference. He'd looked away. You're right. I usually am, I'd said. That's what investment literacy looks like. My mother had approached next. She'd been crying. We failed you, she'd said simply. As parents, we saw what we expected to see instead of asking who you actually were. Yes, I'd agreed. You did. Can you forgive us? I'd considered. Eventually. Maybe. But Mom, you raised me to be humble. To work hard. To build quietly. And then you punished me for embodying exactly those values. You celebrated David's showmanship while dismissing my substance. That's going to take time to forgive. She'd nodded, wiping her eyes. I understand. Today, 2 years after that housewarming party, my life looks remarkably similar on the surface. Same job. Same apartment. Same 7-year-old Honda. Though I could replace it with a Ferrari without checking my account balance. My portfolio has grown to $247 million. I've invested in 16 companies run by overlooked founders. Women, minorities, people who remind me of my grandmother. People who build quietly while others take credit loudly. David's firm survived, but barely. Mitchell Properties now focuses on smaller projects. Modest growth. He's rebuilt some credibility, but the expansion dreams are gone. He works longer hours for smaller returns. He emails occasionally. Updates on his life. Never asking for anything, never offering advice. He's communicating. Like he's trying to rebuild something he destroyed. I respond politely. Briefly. We're not close. We may never be again. But I'm not angry anymore. My parents have learned to ask questions. About my work. My investments. My plans. They're careful now, almost hesitant, like they're afraid of making assumptions. How are you doing? Mom asked last Thanksgiving. Well, I'd replied. I'm considering a significant investment in a sustainable housing development. That sounds wonderful, she'd said. And for the first time in my memory she'd asked, tell me about it? So I had. And she'd listened. Really listened. Progress is slow. Trust is rebuilt in inches, not miles. But I'm no longer the invisible daughter. The investment illiterate failure. The cautionary tale. I'm Sarah Mitchell. I manage a $247 million portfolio. I've generated returns that would make my grandmother proud. And I did it while my family mocked my competence. That housewarming party, standing in my brother's penthouse while he humiliated me in front of 50 people, I made a choice. Not to destroy him. Not to seek revenge. But to stop funding the narrative that I was less than I am. I withdrew my capital. I took back my power. I let the consequences teach the lessons I'd spent 7 years trying to explain with words. And in doing so, I discovered something my grandmother understood instinctively. Real wealth isn't just about money. It's about knowing your value and refusing to accept less than you deserve. Even from family. Especially from family. The money was always there. I just stopped letting them spend it while calling me poor.